Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, I must admit, I am beginning to miss travel a little bit now because I have been fortunate to meet a lot of tech leaders face to face and missing those conversations from the exhibition show floors all around the world. And my last trip was to Chicago in March, just as things were starting to lock down. And that is where today's guest is from. And his name is Brandon Edenfield of Modern Systems, which many of you may know was acquired by Advanced. And they are a global provider of modernization solutions for legacy application source code, data and platform transformations, and much more. And in their 35 years of experience, they have processed more than 2.5 billion lines of code and completed over 500 modernization projects. And their combined resources, software and services, and global reach make them one of the largest independent legacy application modernization companies in the world. And as I'm sure regular listeners will know, before being the blog writing, tech podcasting guy, I was an IT guy, and I did used to look after a large application estate, and I've been through those modernization projects, and I know how painful they are. So this one's a particular of interest to me, because the application modernization market has been projected to reach 16.7 billion by 2022. And according to recent data, nearly 50% of decision makers plan to prioritize app modernization tech this year. That said, almost half of those CIOs also say that the biggest barrier to modernizing processes or systems is cost, a barrier that's obviously going to be detrimental in the future. But Modern Systems is working to try and change that narrative. So I wanted to find out more. But enough for me, so buckle up and hold on tight, because I want to beam your ears all the way to Chicago so we can speak with Brandon Edenfield right now. So a massive warm welcome to the show, guys. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Hi, Neil. My name's Brandon Edenfield, and I'm the Managing Director of Application Modernization at Modern Systems, an Advanced company. Modern Systems was acquired by Advanced in the middle of last year, and I'm now responsible for the entire business worldwide for the company.
My name's Cameron Jenkins, and I'm Executive Vice President working alongside of Brandon with covering sales and business operations and also partner alliances.
Now, it's my understanding that Modern Systems empowers efficiency, agility, and competitive advantage through core application modernization. But can you set the scene and tell me a little bit more about the kind of problems that you're solving for businesses out there?
So what we see is the problems that organizations face when they're reliant on these older legacy systems, or that if the systems and the models they're using to build and operate them are outdated, they're really pretty much outdated compared to the technology and the processes and the pricing models that are being used today with all the newer technology coming on the market. So there isn't really one item that represents the single problem. We always get kind of trapped with that, and people say, well, that's not the problem, or this is not the problem. But the combination of all the issues around these legacy systems make up the reasons that companies need to modernize, we feel. So some of the examples we can talk about are the languages that are used. So legacy programming languages like COBOL were developed in the 50s, literally the 1950s. And when we had computing systems in the 1950s, they certainly never envisioned being put on our telephones. So even though these systems have evolved and been extended over the years, all these different kinds of application languages, they still don't measure up to what the new technologies are that have been built for the modern day needs. You get into the situation of people, right? So the ability to get qualified people, when I say qualified, to write these languages or understand the data platforms that are running on these systems is just not there anymore, not to the extent it needs to be. So we always hear people say that they can, in quotes, get people. But the truth is, just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? The older languages and the data platforms, if you asked a company that was just starting, if you and I were going to start a company and we were going to build new applications for the company, we would never select, for example, an IBM mainframe or a COBOL and assembler language with all those platforms to write that language. We would consider something more in the open system. So these just really aren't, the people aren't really coming into the market to do this. And then you talk about, even if you can get people, the top tier people coming out of universities, they want to move toward the future and not the past. So even if you can get the people, are they really going to be the top candidates that are going to be out in the market? It's not to say there's not money in making COBOL programs, because you do find that there's a lot of business still there today. But we tend to find that the people doing that work are at the end of their career, not really at the beginning. And then, we used to talk 20 years ago about the aging workforce. Well, now these people are aged and retiring, and companies are even talking people into staying longer. And when you're trying to plan for the future, is that really the kind of the model that you should be banking on, when most of the people coming out of school aren't coming into this, and the people that you have are in pretty much nearing retirement age? And then the other, I could talk forever, but I'll just give a few more. The way we used to write, I was a programmer on legacy application platforms, and the way we used to write applications is just outdated compared to what it is today. And a lot of these applications have been built over 20 or 30 years, and they are what they are. And most people wouldn't build these applications the same way as they did. So in the past, we had things called batch processing, where we run a process from start to finish, large amounts of data, updating bunches of files and generating reports. Today, most of these systems would be done in a more real-time fashion with the newer technologies. Performance used to be scaled up, built on one machine to scale up into that box. Today, huge demand on performance, we scale out, and these applications just weren't geared to do that. Most of the companies we talk to believe that they can be more agile and more efficient using newer technologies, and that's why we find a lot of them are moving today as opposed to mostly cost. And we still do see that cost is an issue, but mostly I think the agile computing and trying to stay competitive is pretty much their main driver now. One data point we see in many situations is some companies have told us that they spend up to 80% of their IT budget on these old systems, which leaves 20 to, if they're spending 70 to 80%, 20 to 30% is left for innovation. And that's kind of to me, that's a big issue. So we could talk about this all day, but those are the ones that come to my mind off the top of my head.
And just to put these figures into perspective, I mean, the application modernization market has been projected to reach 16.7 billion by 2022. And yet, by contrast, according to recent data, nearly 50% of decision makers plan to prioritize app modernization tech this year. I'm not sure if that's still the case with everything that's been going on. But that said, almost half of those CIOs are also saying that the biggest barrier to modernizing processes or systems is cost. And the global pandemic will see businesses cutting back on costs more than ever. So the question I've got to ask you, Brandon, is how is Modern Systems working to help change that narrative with customers? Because it's more crucial than ever, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree. I think it is. And I think that for us, cost has always been an issue, because this isn't the sexy project that everybody wants to do. This isn't the new model that everyone's trying to build to. So when people go for the last 20 or 25 years, when these organizations go to their budget committee and ask for projects like this, it's usually not the one they want to prioritize. So cost has always been an issue, and this may make it a little worse, but it should also shine a light on why it's important. State of New Jersey, I don't know if you've read or your listeners have read, that state of New Jersey had a 1,600% increase in unemployment claims because of this pandemic, and because they're steeped in COBOL and legacy platform that has been written in a way that didn't adhere to this level of an issue that wasn't predicted. It's not flexible, it's not agile, and they are not processing these claims properly. So I think that the cost of doing nothing is or can be far greater than the cost of just fixing the problem. And I think that some of these organizations are looking at this pandemic and some of the things that are happening because of it and saying, look, if we ever run into an issue where something breaks or we have this crisis, can we keep up? Are these things even viable? And in some cases, they may say no. So what we find, at least for me personally, I think a lot of the problem with these organizations is they're just in denial, right? There's so many vendors and people who call themselves experts, who are so steeped in the emotion of these older technologies. Some of them benefit by continuing to have them used. Some of them just really believe that, like I was a COBOL programmer. I love COBOL, so I'm going to defend it. So it's a perception presented by these people to these executives, oftentimes who they have great relationships with. It just makes it hard for them to accept the fact that this is a problem and it's real, and that you can limp along with it and keep pushing the money to the other projects, but at some point it's going to catch up. So I think that even though these budgets are going to get cut again, that this is something that is critical to fix. And I think that maybe it'll be a wake-up call for people to realize the question isn't if they're going to modernize, it's really when, how, and with whom. So who's going to help you with that? It's inevitable at some point. So for us, this has always been an issue, and it's just a matter of time before it catches up. I mean, when we were talking about state of New Jersey, can you imagine if this was a competitive situation? So it's unemployment claims. The people filing for these can't go somewhere else, right? So there's no competition. Can you imagine if this was a competitive situation and one of their competitors could process this business? How many customers they would have lost by just ignoring the problem?
And it does seem that I think it's fair to say that most of the industry clearly understands how imperative it is to remain agile and modernized in this digital world, but not all realize the importance of app modernization as a critical first step in that very process. I mean, is that something you have experience with and you could possibly expand on?
So it's really interesting that you say first step, because I love that. So some companies consider, so app modernization or digital transformation, all that is one giant word. And some people think that app modernization means a rewrite. So companies come in and they convince them they can take them from this 30-year-old environment to a perfect nirvana world, and that is the most risky thing anybody can ever do. So I like that you said first step, because we do believe in the staged approach, right? Yeah. So companies who have large quantities of this legacy environment, or they're heavily reliant on it, or it provides some very main focus, which we see a lot, they're being held back, if not stopped altogether from doing what they want to do. Cost is typically an issue. It's very costly to operate these systems. They always continue to have to live in two different worlds. The older environments don't conform to the standards or models being built, like the CI/CD process or whatever. It just hasn't been built around the newer technologies and can't be integrated very easily at all. So again, there's like this big brick wall between the two, and it's very hard to integrate it. You're going to have to keep two sets of experts, which again, it's not just cost, it's distraction, because you have to try to integrate two sets of thinking, right? I'm not saying age-wise, but it's the older procedurally driven environments on these legacy systems versus these agile developers, completely different models. And if they want to maintain a competitive advantage, we're finding that a lot of companies are feeling that they're falling behind. So, I mean, it gives me a good chance to talk about that. I mean, building new applications from scratch is literally the most dangerous model to choose as the modernization process. It virtually goes over budget almost every time in time and cost. We could spend a whole session on that topic. But getting the current environment to a state that's cloud ready in a modern language is a great first step, and that's mostly what we help people with. Moving the languages, the data structures, the environment to a cloud ready state without risking the functionality that you have in your environment is really a good first step, because then you can then take all that in the newer languages that adhere to your main standards and integrate it into that stream of process, and then just put the modernization into a standard kind of repetitive model along with your app dev. It really does help people get there where they want to go.
And something I always try and do on this Daily Tech podcast is bring guests on to finally bust a few myths and lay them to rest. And you've already given us one on the world of application management, but what are the biggest myths in the world of application modernization that you would like to finally lay to rest today? I'm sure you might have a long list, but is there a few that you can?
Well, I have a long list, all right. But first, let me say this. So I think it's important that everybody who's talking about this market, we all have bias, we all have ideas of what we think is right and wrong. But what I have personally found is that every organization has their own unique issues, their own unique situations and criteria and gates that they have to go through. So where I love COBOL and I love that language. I used to write in it. I personally believe it's time for that language to be phased out. I've also seen companies where it just didn't make sense for them to do that at that moment, and none of us should be telling them what to do. We should just be giving them our ideas and what they are. So again, take this for what it's worth. It's my perspective, right? It's not a fact. It's just my perspective. But I think that we see a lot of times, I won't go into it too much more, but that companies convince the organizations that they can just literally take a rewrite, start from scratch, and completely move it to a new environment. Most of that's manual. You'll see some people talk automation, but when they look under the covers, it's really not there. And this is really, really risky. And there's a few points to that, right? So the legacy systems that we see in our customers, and we've been doing this for a very long time, they're typically very poorly documented, if documented at all. We'll walk into customers and say, "Where's your documentation?" And the room laughs because they know they don't have it. And subject matter experts have either retired or left, or there's people that don't really know what these systems do. Sometimes we ask if we want to do this, and one of the objections is, we don't want to touch these things because we don't really know what they do and we don't want to break something. So that's a risk unto itself. Companies also can't freeze development and are continually extending their applications during this project of a quote re-architect or rewrite. So if you don't have a fixed target, how can you ever get there? That target's consistently moving, makes it even more risky. And then to test that is very difficult because you're continuously changing your process. I mean, when you do an automated type project like we recommend and others in the industry like us recommend, you have that base to test from because you're not changing that functionality. So you always know what your target is and if you got there. And at least you've preserved this, put it into a new area. So it's just very difficult for me to get my head around, if I were a CIO, to pay someone to just rewrite something I don't really even know all the way what it does. So that's one kind of I won't call it a myth, but I'll call it a danger. We also get a lot that, companies believe this is a body shop kind of a project where they can go get their large systems integrator who may be doing app development in this side. Maybe they've even outsourced all their app development and maintenance to a large systems integrator who's very credible in their business. But this is not an app development project. Not saying that SIs don't have a role, they absolutely do, but more in the position they should be playing, right? Like where the bodies make sense in the testing side and in the deployment side where they do very well. But the methodologies employed to convert or to modernize these applications are vastly different than what a normal app dev is, right? You're not doing changes, you're not doing small little additions, you're doing full-scale transformations, which is different. The danger of having a tool that's been written by somebody over the last 2 or even 5 years that hasn't seen enough in the market with 2 or 3 projects to make it really robust. The tools that we employ are over 20 years old, some 25, some 30 years old. So the number of projects they've seen, number of differences in the customer's environments they've seen make them extremely robust. And we've done this in many cases. And when I say we, I mean people with this type of a model, not just our company. So we see that. So the myth that this is a body shop thing where just throw more people at the problem is going to fix it, it truly is not. In the last one I'll say is we do a lot now. We've evolved through the Wang market, the HP MPE market, the AS400 market, the VAX market, all kinds of different markets. And the one that's hot right now is the IBM mainframe space. And this was a very serious machine, and it is a very solid platform for reliability and stability. And we hear a lot of the people saying, you cannot replace that with the new technology. That truly is a myth. Okay, that I will call that a myth. Because the number of projects that have been done now are perfect. If you plan the project the right way, consider the operations and the infrastructure in the mix, and architect the platform at the end the right way, it can absolutely perform and reproduce every functionality on that system. So that I would say is the one I would call a myth.
Fantastic. And you have had an incredible career with over 35 years under your belt, transforming legacy environments, whether it be on a mainframe or locked in an outdated Unix environment, and also completed 500 application modernization projects. And as a guy that's only been through one and it nearly killed me, kudos to you there. And also 2.5 billion plus lines of code to date. But I've got to ask, what are the most significant changes that you've seen throughout your career?
I think that when we first started, it was risky for people, right? They were the first early adopters, and it was scary. I mean, the tools weren't exactly there the way they should have been. That's why when I say things that are developed over the last 2 to 5 years are weak, but not really ready for prime time. We know because we were there, and I know the effort it took to get these things where they are and the amount of things we see. So I think that the amount of credibility in the specialty vendors, processes, and tools are way better now than they were back then. So the risk is a lot less. I think the ability to test is better. I think we've all come a long way, both customers and us, and the partnerships that are involved, to make sure that the testing is taken a lot more seriously. The infrastructure, boy, back in the day, 20 years ago, the open systems infrastructure was challenging. Now I think that we've got very robust performant architectures and networks and connectivity and storage and everything needed to get this thing up. And I think it's pretty good. So I think the risk is a lot less for these customers moving now than it was back then. Even though we succeeded, it was a harder road. And things like cost. When we first started this, I think cost was the main issue. Everybody wanted an ROI quickly. And now what we see is, even though ROI is important, right? People are concerned with cost. They're more concerned with the agility and the ability to remain competitive. They're seeing their customers modernize. And like I said, if in New Jersey, they had a competitor that could have kept up, I mean, I would have gone there, and people will lose business if their competitors get more agile and more quick on their feet than they are. So that's the big thing that I've seen, is that it's moved from the cost as the main issue to agility as the main issue, and just risk of aversion as the main issue. And I think that's kind of what I would see the main changes. It's the environments are better, the tooling is better, the offerings made by all of us are better, and I think that people really are starting to need to do it more than they did before.
And it just feels that everything's a little bit up in the air at the moment. And I've got to ask, I mean, what are the biggest challenges that businesses are coming and asking you for help with at the moment? And how are you helping them overcome these challenges?
Well, I mean, I think that, one of the challenges costs, and we try to be as cost competitive as we can. But, one of the big challenges that companies have is a commitment, right? So this is, like you said, you did one and it almost killed you, right?
Yes.
It is a difficult project. People have to take it seriously. They have to be committed from start to end. You can't kind of get halfway in and then quit when it gets hard, or you've wasted your money. So I think what we try to help companies with is not to take this as a point situation, right? So if you just look at the applications and the data and you forget that, like, as an example, an IBM mainframe has a huge operational environment. It's very secure, it's very reliable, and you have to make sure that it can perform when it gets there and that you've covered all of the operational components, you'll fail. We try to help companies understand that they can't trivialize the testing, and the better they test, the better the outcome, and that they are going to have to put a resource into the project. And if that means their own people, they have to backfill those people so that they can continue with their current line of business but support the project. And that they may need to understand they need a combination of a specialty vendor like us and a company like a large SI, hopefully that's doing their app dev, that can provide the bodies it takes to do testing. And they have to understand that they have to put a real budget behind it. And if they try to skimp on what they need to try to lock it into a budget, it's kind of better not to start, because these things are career building or career ending for some of these companies. And, we know we've been successful. We have the model. And if we're allowed to do some leading, we can lead them into the successful end. We also try to help them understand, like I've said it 100 times, that, if it looks too good to be true, it is. Not probably. And to think you're going to go from 30-year-old technology in a predictable time frame for a reasonable cost and get this perfect, pure nirvana, if that were the case, everyone would do it. So we try to just help them see the truth. And we have so many, us personally, we have so many different options. So we don't force them to go one way or another. We can help them stay in their current environment and modernize in place if that's their first step. We can help them move off if that's their first step. We have a whole bunch of different things. So we're not trying to sell them something because that's the only thing we have. So we hope we help them a lot. And I think our success record will prove that we have.
Well, the one incident I had, it was with a company that had around 300 applications who wanted to modernize everything and also cut back on some of those apps. And I'd say the hardest obstacle to come across was getting internal stakeholders to buy into the project, because they're all fiercely protective of those legacy apps. They didn't want anybody touching them. They'd had no budget to improve them, etc. So how are you helping businesses overcome the challenge of those legacy systems in these digital transformation initiatives?
Well, so the point you just made is a very good one, and I go back to my commitment, right? You have to have commitment from a very strong leadership team. And I don't want to use names on this call, but we have a couple of clients right now in the middle of projects where the management team is fierce and they're dedicated and they're dynamic and their people love them, and they're going to drive this to the end, and they're going to stick with the project, and we'll stick with them because we have a mutual commitment as a partner to make sure that this works. So we can't help them decide to move. That has to be their own, and they have to make that commitment and be resolved to it. We can't help them get the budget. We can just help them see the risk of not doing it. But that is one of the most challenging things. They have to have the commitment. But again, we think that it's more risk to stay where they are than not. And all we can really do is to show them a responsible path that can balance, all of these risks and costs and time constraints, and help to augment them the best we can. And again, we believe that our 20 plus years of running these projects and the automated tools that we have in the state that they are, and our willingness to work with them and their partners, right? So we don't believe in any major company just forcing one vendor, right? We're happy to go through any kind of model that fits their need so that they can feel comfortable. But it's a doable project. The only thing that we have to say always is they have to make the decision, right? You can, I use the smoker thing, right? You can tell a smoker to stop smoking, but you can't force them, right? They can keep coming to the doctor for the illness, but you can't force them to stop. Someone has to agree they're going to dedicate the money and actually do the project.
Excellent. And what about you guys? What is your big focus at Modern Systems for the next 12 months?
So I think fortunately for us, we are doing what the market needs right now. I think that we have a very the least risk, the lowest cost, and the most automated process to get them to, as you put it, like a stage one, and do this in stages. So we're going to continue to do what we've been doing. If we're going to expand anything for ourselves, we're going to expand our area. We've got some really good ideas about automated testing and helping people. We're seeing a lot more move to the cloud, and the infrastructure concepts around the cloud are different than the traditional deployment used to be. And we're about to offer some interesting things around those two extensions to help people in those areas, and also around optimization and even microservices. So what we do is we try to get them into a starting point, get them out of the legacy and into the mainstream of what everybody else in their organization is doing with, a modern language, but maintaining everything and all of the functionality that they had in the old system. But the next phase is optimization, right? How do we optimize this for horizontal scalability if they want to move to the cloud? How do we optimize this so if we find a batch job that maybe not performing the way it should, break that piece up and help them in a very selective way, potentially optimize or re-architect individual components as opposed to trying to eat the whole pie in one bite. During our assessment process, which is very robust, we can identify those singular things that maybe give them the biggest bang to the buck, and then put those in the mix. So we're going to start offering a little more so we can be a partner for our customers after the first phase is done. Right now, we do a great job at the first phase and leave the rest of the phases to others. We're trying to be a better partner for our customers as they move through the journey.
Well, I've loved having you on the podcast today, Brandon. Before I do let you go, could I ask that you remind everyone listening of where they can find you guys online, and also contact your team if they are left with any questions after our conversation today?
So our website is www.modernsystems.com. Cameron, do you have better contacts for people that want to call us or reach us?
I think that's obviously that is our website. Certainly they can reach out to me, direct email Brandon to C Jenkins at modernsystems.com. That's JENKINS, C Jenkins. And also, if people still use the phone, we take phone calls as well at 858-218 5260.
Fantastic. Well, a huge thank you for coming on today. Listening to you talk there, I'm still getting flashbacks from my application modernization. I always remember a painful meeting where I think there was about an hour and a half just determining what label we were going to categorize the apps. And an argument broke out between, is it core applications? Is it tier one applications? It's still stuck with me now.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's for sure. Well, thank you for having us on, Neil. This has been really good.
No, thank you so much, guys.
Thank you, Neil.
While that was a serious tech conversation, I want to tell you that I had so much fun on this call today. I just hit it off with Brandon immediately, who's an incredibly funny guy. He had me giggling like a naughty schoolboy. So for that reason alone, he has officially been added to my cool guys I want to share a cold beer with, and maybe find myself getting into a few scrapes and adventures along the way. But on a serious note, while the industry clearly understands how imperative it is to remain agile and modernised in this digital world, not everybody realises the importance of application modernisation as a critical first step in that process. So a big thank you to Brandon for addressing those issues and also transforming legacy environments and answering my questions around application modernisation projects. But this is where I turn the virtual microphone over to you. Let's talk about application modernisation. I want you to share your experiences. And by that, I mean the good, the bad, and the ugly. And you can do that by emailing me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. My website is techblogwriter.co.uk. And you can find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram @Neil C. Hughes. But we're out of time again, I'm afraid. But don't worry, I've got so many guests lined up for you all. They're coming thick and fast. I think I have 15 episodes recorded and ready to go. And we have interviews booked in till the end of July. So don't worry, I'm not going anywhere. But before I go, I just wanted to say a big thank you for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.